Now let's learn how to create your very first Java program. Open up Eclipse and you should see the IDE. Within the IDE, we see the package area, which simply says these are where all your projects are. This is your source code area, and this is the console area where you will see output. For instance, if you do a system.out.println, this is where you would see the display. It simulates the actual output of running a program in Java, maybe like a DOS window or the command line. So let's create a new Java project. Every application you create in Java has to be in a project. File, New, Java Project. You want Java Project, not Project. So click on Java Project. It prompts you for the project name. We'll type in first program and then click Finish. If you notice, over in our package area, we now have first program. I can maximize that, and I have a folder for the source and a folder for the JRE library. Currently in source, we have no programs associated with this project. After creating your Java project, you need to create Java programs. We call these classes. So with that folder selected, I can say File, New, Class. It prompts you for the name. We'll call this the same name as our project. You do not have to name your Java programs the same name as your project, but I will in this case for simplicity. The other thing you'll want to do is make sure that this checkbox is checked. Public static void main. This means that Java will go ahead and add a skeleton framework of code to your program. Main says this is where we start. When you start to run my program, my application for Java, you need to find something in my source code called main, and that's where you'll start processing. So once that's checked, click Finish. It will now create a Java program. Notice that the Java program has an extension of .java. It creates a class file. That class file has to be the same name as your Java program. Case matters. That means if the F is capitalized, then you have to capitalize the S in the class name. In this situation, both the F and the P are capital letters. That does match the name of our source code .java file. Public says I'm visible to everybody. Anybody can run this program that needs to run this. Class says I belong to a class, or I am a class, and the name of my class is first program. Curly brace says I begin a block of code. If you have an opening curly brace, you also need a closing curly brace, just like in HTML where you had opening tags and closing tags. /* opens up a multiple line comment. The multi-line comment is closed with an asterisk slash, once again similar to HTML. One comment you should always put in your program is your name. The other thing you should put is a description of your program. The // is a single line comment. Public static void main. This is a method. Main says I start here for processing. So computer, when you run the program, look for main, and that's where you're supposed to start. Public says I'm visible everywhere. Static says this source code belongs to a class. Void says when you call main, or when you call this method, it does not give anything back. Main is the name. This area inside the parentheses, those are called arguments, and we'll discuss those later on in class. Once again, each of the methods has an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. Here's what I could do for this program. Let's say that I wanted to have two variables that were of type integer. In other words, they could have values. And I want to compare one integer value to another integer value. And if the one is greater, then I will display that number is greater. Otherwise, I'll display the other number and say it is greater. Here's how you do it. I went ahead and typed in all the source code to make sure this would work, and that way you didn't have to actually watch me type characters. The first thing I did though was change to single line comment where I said declare the variables. Then I declared two variables. An integer variable called I first, another integer variable called I second. The way you do it is by typing the word int, which means integer. That's the data type. The variable name is lowercase I first. I did not have to put a lowercase I there, but I do that to make my code more readable. It's called Hungarian notation. A little I tells a developer that if they ever see that variable, it should have an integer variable in it, or an integer value. The computer could care less that the little I is there. We do it only for readability's sake. The other thing you should notice is that I tab or put indents in my code and use white space, blank lines. So I've declared two variables, one called I first of type integer, another called I second of type integer. Every Java executable line ends with the semicolon. The next two statements are where I assign values to the variables. This says, go to the variable I first, which we remember was an integer, and assign it with the equal statement, the number 10, semicolon. That puts the number 10 inside of the variable I first. Then we say, let's assign the value of 20 to the variable I second. By the time I'm done with these two statements, I first has the value of 10, I second is holding the value of 20. The next statements compare the variables. If, parentheses, the contents of the variable I first is greater than the contents of the second variable I second, parentheses, curly brace. We use curly braces to keep blocks of code together. If I did not use a curly brace on this if statement, I would only be able to type in one line. Get into the habit of using curly braces for your if statements. A lot of students make mistakes by leaving off the curly brace and then having two lines associated with the if statement. This says if the value of I first is greater than I second, then we're going to print out using system.out.println, which is a method found in the out system library. We'll print out, double quote, the first variable is greater, double quote. That is a string. We end it with the semicolon. Then we also print out the contents of the variable I first, which we know had a value of 10. If I first is not greater than I second, then we'll print out else, curly brace. We'll print out the second variable is greater, and then print off the comments or the contents of the variable I second. Let me run this, and then you'll see what displays in the console window. You run by clicking on the green arrow right here. It will prompt you to save. Always save before you run. The second variable is greater, 20. Now watch what happens. What if I changed I first to be 20 and I second is 20? What do you think will happen? It still says the second variable is graded. This is not a bug in the program. This is actually a logic bug. Not a syntax bug, but a logic bug. If I first is greater than I second, is that true or false? I first has 20, I second has 20. They're equal, so it's not greater than. So we drop to the else, which says the second variable is greater. That needs to be fixed. Whenever you write programs, you always want to fix the syntax errors. However, be cautious because you might have logic errors also. Let's take a look at the modified code to see if this logic now works. The I first variable has a value of 20. it was declared here as an integer. The isSecond variable also has a value of 20. It was also declared as an integer. You could declare these both on the same line. However, I find that if I put them over multiple lines, I make my code more readable. If iFirst is greater than iSecond, that's false, because iFirst is 20 and iSecond is 20. Else, space, if iFirst is less than iSecond, that's also false. Else, we display the variables are equal, and in this case we just display the variable iSecond. We could display both variables if we wanted to. We could say iFirst and then also iSecond. Well, it doesn't really work that way with the print line method. So what we would have to do is concatenate. That's where you add strings with other variables. Here's how you could do that. Sorry, I have a typo, but it's fixed. The first variable is, that's a string. Then we do the plus sign. That means concatenation. We're adding one value to another value. What's the value of iFirst? 20. So this will display the first variable is 20. And then it also adds and. The second variable is the contents of iSecond, which is also 20. If we run that, we should see the output. The variables are equal. The first variable is 20 and the second variable is 20. Let's run it and see what the output is. The variables are equal. The first variable is 20 and the second variable is 20. That's how you can create your first Java program, declare some variables, assign values to the variables, and then compare the variables and output.